So we now turn our attention to this idea of domain and range one more time, with the understanding that one way that we could think about the domain was the input values. So remember, the domain of a function was the same thing as saying the input values, which is also the same thing as saying the x values of the function. So if we're trying to determine what the domain is of a function, what we want to do is we want to look at the graph, and we want to specifically look at the horizontal values on the graph. Remember, the horizontal values are the same thing as the x values. Similarly, if we talk about this idea of range, the range represents all the output values, and the output values are the same thing as saying our y values. So when we want to figure out what the range of a graph is, if we're looking at it graphically, we're looking at all of the vertical values, because again, remember that the range is represented by the y values, which is responsible for the vertical axis, the rising, going up and down on the axes. So let's take a look at 3 examples of domain and range. Let's take a look at this first example over here. For number 1, I want us to make sure that we can identify both the domain and the range of this function, and we're going to write our answer using interval notation. Now, for the domain of this function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the x values. So see if you can follow the yellow line that I'm drawing here. My values start right here. My x values, the horizontal values, and notice that that starts over here, which looks like it is -4 on the x-axis, and my graph ends right here, and the x value that that's mapped to is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So our graph starts at -4 and it ends at 8. But keep in mind, notice we have that open circle there at -4, so we're going to represent that by using an open parenthesis, and the domain goes from -4 to 8. And we'll do the range and y. Now our range, the range or the y values, which we'll do over here in green, now we're going to look at the vertical axes. So now I'm going to go up and down. My graph starts down here. You know, that's the same thing as saying -2 on the y-axis, and my graph ends up here, which is the same thing as saying, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on the y-axis. So we're going from -2 for my smallest value to 7 for our largest value. Again, the -2 is not included, so I'm going to leave that as -2 and 7. Okay, oops, made a mistake over here. Remember that this endpoint 8 on our x-axis is included, so we're going to represent that by using a bracket. Oh, keep going the eraser. We're going to represent that by using a bracket. And remember that our 7 is included, so we're going to represent that by using a bracket as well. So here's our domain and range of that first function. Let's take a look at the second function. Again, I'm going to start off with the domain, and we'll do the domain in blue for the second one. And let's take a look over here. We'll keep this all in blue. Our x values, or we're starting our horizontal values over here, which is at -3. It is included because it's a closed circle, so the domain starts at -3. Now let's see where it ends. So I'm following the function, and oop, you see that arrow over there? That means we go on infinitely in the right direction. So the domain of this function is from -3 to infinity. Now let's do the range. Take a look at the range. We'll do that one in red. The range are the y values. The y values start right here. Now I'm going to look at my axes. My up and down axes are my y-axes. And it starts right here. And it ends, well, starting over here at 0. Look at where it ends. Notice as I go, it's getting higher and wider and higher and wider. That means that my y values are starting at 0 and they're ending at positive infinity. Now remember, infinity always gets a parenthesis, so we're going to try to be consistent with that. Let's try one more example. Let's finish with this one over here. Let's take a look at the domain and range of this function. So for the domain. Okay, so I'm going to start looking on my x-axis to see if I can find the domain. Okay, my x values are getting smaller. My x values are still going to the left. They're getting smaller and smaller. Oh, my x values are going to continue going. That's what that arrow means, down and to the left, infinitely like that. So my x values are starting at -infinity. And now let's see where my x values end. So again, I'm looking horizontally. Oops, getting bigger, getting bigger, getting bigger, getting bigger. And it looks like I'm going to continue going up and up like that infinitely. So I have a domain that's going to be all reals. It's going from negative infinity to positive infinity. Now let's use the red. Oh, excuse me. Let me erase that. Let's use our red to help us represent what we mean when we talk about our range. So in terms of the range, well, let's see. I'm starting down pretty far. Remember, this arrow is coming down from negative infinity. So starting down from negative infinity. And this arrow, you see how this arrow is going up, up, up? That means I'm going to positive infinity. So I have a range that goes from negative infinity to positive infinity.